All right. So I thought I would try something a little bit different rather than doing something direct to the camera so you get to see my face. I thought I would do something a bit different, try out something brand new and share the screen. So I've got the title, which is How to Control Fear and Not Let It Stop You. So this is the first training that was asked for, the first one that was voted for, something that you guys want me to do a training on. So it's all about fear and how we can get it so it doesn't actually stop you and hold you back and all those sort of things. So for those of you that are for those of you that are watching live, for those of you that want to come on or whatever it happens to be, I'm just going to invite a few people just to let them know that I'm coming on, so then they know. But apart from that, if you are coming on, if you are live, say hi, let me know that you're here. Hopefully Facebook will tell me, because this is a brand new system that I'm using, so hopefully it works out. And let me know that you can hear me okay. Let me know everything's coming through all right. Hopefully you have a notepad and a pen, because I've got notes. I'm going to share some things with you that you may or may not have heard before. And this is plan of action. So, hi Ruth, you all right? Good to see you. So just before we dive into a lot of the nuts and bolts, I thought I would ask you what you think fear is. Is it an emotion? Is it a feeling? Is it a sensation? What is fear to you? How would you describe it if you were explaining it to somebody else? How would you actually go about describing it and allowing yourself to experience it? All right. Hi Adams, good to see you. Have to catch the replay. Yeah, not a problem. Not a problem. Don't worry about it. So what is fear when you try and describe it? How does it feel to to experience it? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What's your relationship like with fear? All of those kinds of things. There's a lot that can go into fear. There's a lot that can happen. There's a lot that can show up. And it's always good to have a level of control, I guess. It's always helpful to have a certain amount of influence over the amount of fear that you can have, because there are a lot of people, could be you watching this or listening to this, that experiences fear, but because you have a negative relationship with fear, you actually feel worse because of it. Like, you feel worse because of the feeling rather than like the reason why you're feeling fear. So very often this can actually make things worse. So that's something to think about just before we dive in. All right. And the first thing I want to get across firstly is, what is fear? What does it do? How does it show up? How does it impact you? What certain things can you do to reduce the feeling that you have? What sort of things can you do that can reduce it or even get rid of fear altogether? So I'm going to go from adjusting to the idea of fear, figuring out what fear is, accepting the fact that you can experience fear and still take action. And then we're going to dive into a lot of the other things. We're going to dive into some treatments for it when it shows up, and then we're going to move into possibly the prevention as well. So how can you set it so you don't actually experience fear? You experience something very different that can still allow you to push forwards and take the action that you know that you should probably take. So that is the plan for this training. All right, and Ruth says, fear to me is when I can't make that crucial step. Yeah, definitely, yeah. So it tends to relate to something that we're going to touch on. So I'll bring that up, Ruth, when we get to it, and hopefully it can have a positive effect on yourself. All right. So fear, firstly, it's an emotion. It's something that we feel. It's a group of sensations or occurrences that happen. It's a physical thing. There are things that happen in the body physically when you experience fear. But fear ultimately is an emotion, it's a feeling, it's a very, very intense emotion. It's one of our more intense emotions as well. It's one of the most intense emotions that we can feel because it tends to tends to lean towards the idea that our survival is at risk. It lends itself over to the possibility that there is a definite threat in our environment that we have to deal with. It's something that we actually have to put a plan in place so that we can deal with the threat that is going on, the threat that's happening to us. It allows us to understand it, recognize it, and then ultimately deal with it to get away from the fear. Fear is something that we want to avoid as much as possible. Something that we used to have to avoid as much as possible because it meant that our survival was at stake. So, do we actually experience that level of fear in our day to day? I mentioned that it used to be that way. We used to experience fear quite a lot. Well, have a think. Do we actually experience fear in the survival sense now? Is that something that we actually experience now in the modern world, in the the way that we live our lives today? Is fear something that we actually experience? Have a think. If you're watching live or the replay, now's your chance to answer. Now is your chance to comment and let me know. Do you think that you actually experience that kind of fear day to day? And then when you actually start to answer that question and start to feel your way through this, have a think again. Is there a moment when it probably isn't fear, but it's more like a worry sensation? You're more anxious, you're more worried. It's almost like a panic type situation rather than I am afraid, this is full-blown fear, and there's nothing I can do about it. Is it more likely to be worry or panic or anxiety rather than fear? So have a think. Does this actually have a particular cause as well? Does this worry or panic or even fear actually have a cause? Is there a reason for it? Is your survival actually at stake? And the argument is that it's not. We don't feel fear in the the very real sense. We feel fear because it's something that we heard, it's something that someone told us in the past. And words are a very, very difficult way of conveying things that might be different from person to person, and feelings or emotions are very, very different because what's very emotional to us might actually not be as emotional to somebody else. So there's the things that make you feel panic or worried or afraid doesn't do the same for somebody else. So not everybody feels fear depending on the situation. But fear tends to be something that everyone experiences. We all have a fear of like monsters, if you will, so like snakes or spiders or animals or any of those kinds of things, we fear our survival. If there's something that we think our survival is at risk, that is when fear comes in, and this is something that everybody experiences. But worry or panic or nerves or feeling anxious, these are different from person to person, which means that, well, does that person just not feel the same thing as you? Have they got over it to a certain degree? Have they trained themselves out of it through exposure? Maybe the first time they did it, they probably did feel those nerves, but they got over it and they carried on and they kept going until they no longer felt that level of nerves, that level of emotion. Does that mean that it's not actually happening? Does that mean that it's all inside our own head? And the actual situation is just the situation. That situation's just there, just causing us to do things that we wouldn't normally do, to think things that we wouldn't normally think, to say things that we wouldn't normally say. And it just causes you to become a different person. And very often, this is what happens. Very often, this is the thing that a lot of people experience. We think, say, feel, and do things that we wouldn't actually normally do. We wouldn't actually normally do it. And we are a different person, because when we have these emotions and they are negative emotions, we will do something that takes us away from that. We will do something that takes us away from the negative emotion. It takes us away from it completely. And what we tend to forget is, what we tend to not realize is those actions might not actually help us get to where we want to get to. They might not actually help us achieve what we want to achieve. The action's only there to get rid of the fear. The action's only there to get rid of the panic. The action's only there to solve the negative emotion. Have a think about that. Think about what that means for some of the actions that you're taking. Have a think about what that could mean for the direction that you're taking. If it's to move away from a negative emotion, you could be moving away from the thing that you actually want to do, the thing that you actually feel like you need to do. But you're spending so long moving away from negative emotions, you're spending so long moving away from negative feelings and sensations that that's all that you know. That's all that you know. And you put yourself in a pattern whereby you're not allowed or you're not supposed to experience those things, and you end up living in avoidance, you end up living in denial almost of the negativity, and that's what's keeping you in the rut that you are in. It's not the actual situation, it's the prediction of how bad the situation could be. Think about that. It's our prediction of how bad the situation could be. Which implies, as I said before, to the idea that we are in our own heads very, very often. We are telling ourselves certain things, we are creating certain stories, we are having certain conversations with ourselves that are putting us in this negative place and are causing a lot of the actions that we don't want to take, that we shouldn't want to take, but we are taking them to get away from the negative emotions. So, in the comments, while I grab a quick drink, have a think about what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're thinking that's designed to take you away from the negative feelings but might not actually be getting you to where you want to go. Have a think, write it down in the comments or write it down in a book if you have a book. I'm going to grab a drink and then hopefully there'll be some comments. So now we've moved on from that. Now we need to start coming up with the concept of, can we actually control fear? Can we actually do something about it? Can we actually put ourselves in a position whereby we can do something about fear? Now, what I want to get across firstly is, very often we are experiencing the result of what fear does. At the moment, we are experiencing the result. So if you're struggling, if you're procrastinating, if you're giving yourself a hard time, if you're putting yourself in difficult positions and causing yourself to have these negative situations and negative thoughts and negative words that you start telling yourself, and all of those kinds of things, that's the result of the emotion already. So at that point, it's very, very hard to step in and do something about it while you're experiencing it. So this can come from the idea of, say, meditation, whereby someone would experience an emotion, experience a sensation, experience a thought, and then they will slowly let that thought go. In that we are experiencing and letting it go, and we have a lot of practice doing that, and that happens for however long we decide to put ourselves in that state. So can we actually do something about fear once it shows up? And the answer is not until you've gotten to the other side of it. So not until the emotion starts to fade away can you then look at, okay, how can I prevent it next time? So it's more about, how can you prevent it? What can you do to reduce the emotion to a point where you can then cope with it and take action, even though that emotion's showing up? So you could be someone that has to make emotional decisions. You can be someone that has to actually put yourself into the spot whereby it's a difficult situation, it's a difficult decision, it's a difficult time that you're in, and these emotions show up because it's important. So this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but we tend to feel the emotions because things are important to us. Like, you're nervous because you want it to go well. Like, fear of failure is because you don't want it to fail, right? You don't want it to fail. It's important to you. You don't want to be in a position whereby this doesn't work out, which means that you actually care about that situation. You're in a position whereby it's a good thing that you care. So having a positive relationship with fear would definitely be a good start, would definitely be a step in the right direction, because fear happens. You experience this emotion because it's important to you, because you care about the outcome. Something to think about. So what can we do to reduce the level of fear? What can we do to reduce the level of emotion, the amount that we are feeling, to the point where we can then still take action? Because if fear had its way, it would keep you exactly where you are in the box, if you will, and you're never ever going to get out of that, because fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of everything about the fact that you can't actually predict what can happen, or any part of what can happen, will keep you exactly where you are, because it keeps you safe when you know what's going to happen. It will keep you safe when you know that what will happen is what will happen, and you can handle it. You have a response for whatever goes on. When you don't have that, that is when these emotions show up. This is when the threats show up. This is when your safety, or your happiness, or your success, or your fulfillment, or your level of confidence, if you will reduce. And that is not what you want when it comes to, feeling like you can take action, feeling safe in the environment that you find yourself in. And it's a very, very difficult situation when you're in it. But once you've experienced the emotion, you've got to actually say to yourself, this is what's happening. You've got to have a level of awareness and a level of acceptance to say, I'm actually experiencing this now. I am afraid of X, Y, and Z. You've got to actually tell yourself, I'm feeling this way. Too often we repress the emotions, we reduce the emotions, we convince ourselves that we're not feeling a particular way, we tell ourselves that everything will be alright even though our feelings are telling us otherwise, and the fact that we don't sit there and say, I'm afraid of this now. I don't know if it'll work. I don't want it to fail. I'm struggling to see how I can actually pull this off. Just by saying that, using those words, well, the right words, right? Use the words that fit your particular situation, which is why things like the self-talk and the conversation that you have will be different. It will be different from person to person. So you need to have your own actual conversation. All right? So when that happens, you go, right, what can I do about it? And very often, just being honest with yourself, just telling yourself that you're experiencing fear right now, you're experiencing panic right now, you're worried, you're anxious, things are showing up that you don't want to show up. That then actually relieves some of the pressure. And it doesn't actually intensify the emotion. If anything, it'll naturally reduce the emotion just by acknowledging the fact that you are feeling the emotion that you're feeling. And once you do that, you then start to think about, okay, what can I do to change it? What can I do to improve that? What can I do to enhance the more positive aspects of myself? You know, just be more positive. What different ways can you do that? Well, sometimes you've got to think about what already puts you in a good mood. What already puts you in a good mood. It could be music, it could be a film, it could be pictures, it could be talking to certain people, it could be watching a comedy thing, it could be reading a particular joke, it could be watching cartoons, it could be going out for a walk, it could be a workout, it could be talking to friends, whatever it happens to be. Very often, these emotions show up around people. It tends to be a social thing. It's not something that just appears out the blue. So it tends to be related to people. And then when you think, well, maybe the solution might be a social thing as well. Like if you just hear from someone, everything will be okay, that can be enough for you to say, okay, well, maybe I can do it. Maybe I can take that action. Maybe I can put myself in that situation and maybe it'll work out. Maybe I will find a way to make it work. And then that gives you the little bit of a boost so that you can take the action and then get the results at the end. So it can start off as a little tweak, a little nudge in a positive direction, a little shift of the balance towards this more positive state of mind. And once you can do that, you can start to then think clearly. You can start to put yourself in a better emotional state, and then you can think clearly, you can make better decisions, you can think more logically or rationally rather than purely emotionally. Everything changes about the way your brain operates when you can put yourself in a more positive state. Positive things like thinking further into the future, positive things like looking for proof or evidence for the claim that you're making, for the potentially negative claim that you're making. If you tell yourself, I can't do it because of maybe I'm not good enough to do it, is it right? Well, if you stay there, you'll stay with that question and you won't come up with the answer. The mental state that gives you the question, the negative question, is not the same state that you are going to want to answer that question in. So if you're negative, you tell yourself you're not good enough, don't stay with the question, don't come up with the answer until after you've put yourself in a positive place. All right, I've been guilty of this whereby I've stayed negative, I've put myself in a bit of a negative spin, and I've stayed in that negative spin because I've not put myself in a positive place. before I then go about answering that question and looking for the evidence and looking for the proof. Because when you're in that place, when you're in a more positive place, a positive mental state, you then start to see things that you wouldn't already see. You start to have conversations with yourself that you wouldn't already have. You start to put yourself in the situations and start to see a more positive outlook around the scenarios that you're in. Because if you're negative, all of the answers will be negative. If you're positive, all of the answers will be positive. All of the different things that you can do, all of the different little tweaks that you can put onto certain scenarios can actually put you in a better place. So then the actions will come more natural to you. You'll have more positive situations. You'll have more positive outcomes, more positive responses, different pros and cons. Maybe you wouldn't have any pros if you were in a negative state, you know? But because you're in a positive state, you can come up with pros to doing things. You can analyze things. You can look at things more logically. You can actually say, what if I could do this? What would it look like if I could give it my all? What would it look like if I could put myself there and do it and take the action? What could happen if I did it rather than what could happen if I didn't do it? How would I feel if I did do it? How would I feel if I didn't do it? It's very hard to answer the complex questions when you're in the negative space because you start to think short term. You start to just worry about getting away from the negative emotion. As I said right back at the beginning, we get away from the negative emotion no matter what the consequences. Need a bit of a cough there. So we do that without knowing what the negative consequences are. We do it anyway, and then we end up regretting it afterwards, or we start to have to put up with the negativity that happens sometimes after we do something and realize what we've done. You're less likely to regret the decisions that you're making if you make them from a positive place. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Make sure you take some of that in. You might have to actually listen to this again. You might have to really go through it because I felt like I went on a bit of a roll there, to be honest. There was a lot that I said, there was a lot that I covered in those couple of minutes. So before I get into the last part, if you have any questions, don't worry, Ruth, I saw your question. If you have any questions, feel free to type them below. I'm going to grab myself another drink and then we'll dive into the final part of this. Just an answer to your question, Ruth. It can happen straight away. So you can take the action straight away. And I think it was Tony Robbins that said that it's easier to kill the monster when it's small rather than feeding it and waiting until it's a giant destroying the city before you then decide to do something about it. So if you imagine your negative emotions as the monster, the earlier you can reduce the amount of emotion, the earlier you can do something to get you out of that spin, the easier it is because the balance hasn't tipped so far in the negative direction that you then have to do a lot just to pull yourself back. So we all have like different things that we can do when things get too much. Like we can just detach from everything. We can go on a holiday. We can, not do anything business-wise. We can take a sabbatical if we wanted to and just detach and just go away. But that's a very extreme end. That's when you're burnt out. That's when everything's piling up on you. You have the exaggerated option, right? You have the big thing that you can do that can take you away from all that. But on the day to day, on the week by week, on the month by month, you're going to need to come up with something that you can use, that you can have in your toolbox for when the negativity shows up. And the earlier you can do it, the easier it is, because it's not this big emotion that's taken over your day or your week or your month, depending on how long it's hanging around for. All right, so it can happen straight away. I would always advise that you try and do stuff as early as possible, because it's easier to do. I mean, it probably feels like you don't need it sometimes. Like when I started doing this, which is a few years ago now, I used to think that I didn't need to do it. So I would wait until I felt like I would benefit from something, whether it be going for a walk, listening to music, whatever the case is. I'd wait until I needed to do it. Where over the years I realised that actually, if every now and again I just put like a funny film on, or every now and again I just listen to one of my favourite songs, or a song that just it might not be my favourite song, but it's a song that just seems to put me in a good mood. I don't know why, you know? Like it could just be a song that puts you in a good mood. And if every week or every month or every day, even depending on how fast your mind works, because we all operate at different speeds. And if you're going at 1,000 miles an hour, everything's up and down. If you have half an hour off, you feel like you should fill that time. You know, if you're all go constantly, you probably need to do things in a positive environment every single day. Like you can't afford to even tip the balance even a little bit. So this is where we get into the more prevention stuff, which we're going to get into in the last part. But just remember that things can impact us in more ways than we think. Like if a song can make you feel good, or music can make you feel scared, like they put in certain films to make you feel more scared, to make you feel more emotional. If that can happen, and something as big as the voices that are in our heads, the words that we use, the way that we describe the situations that we are in, chances are that'll have a bigger impact, not a lesser impact on the way that we're feeling. All right, so we're going to move into the prevention side of things, and this really does start with what Ruth's question was all about, which was, you know, how early can we do it? Do we do things when it shows up? And the answer is you don't need to. You don't need to. If you imagine it as a balance, as a set of scales or a seesaw, for instance, and if it's always tipped towards a positive direction, you're always happy, you're always in a positive space, you're filled with energy, you laugh every day, smile every couple of hours, all of those good stuff starts to flowing through. Imagine how hard it is to impact that person in a negative way. How hard is it to put yourself in a negative place when you're already very, very positive? Right? Like if someone's had a very, very good day, they probably won't cry at a funeral, right? Just as an example. But it's almost like you can be negative, you have a bad day, and you could turn up at a party and you're still not happy, right? You could be in a bad mood, you could be in a bad mental state. At a party, everyone else is happy and jolly and you're sat in the corner, like in a bad place because of what happened, or it could be something small, because something small can also impact you in a big way. But just remember that the environment does play a part. But sometimes if you're in a bad negative space, it's going to take more. If you're in a good positive place, it will also take more to make you feel negative. I always use the example of you can be in traffic in a good place, you know, favorite songs on, you've got friends in the car, you had a very, very healthy breakfast that morning, you got up nice and early, maybe had a quick workout before you went in the car to go, and you hit a traffic jam. You won't be as angry, you won't be as fed up, you won't be as road rage like, if you will, than if you got there and you were late for work, didn't have time, maybe there wasn't any hot water in the shower, maybe you stubbed your toe on the way down the stairs, maybe you had a bit of an argument with your spouse before you went out, you hit that same traffic jam. It's a very, very different story, isn't it? It's very different. You start screaming at the whole world. You start blaming the radio for not playing music that you want to play, and you start shouting at stuff because, it didn't do what it wanted it to do before you told it to do it. Like, it's got to somehow predict what you want it to do. When we're angry, we start to be a bit unrealistic in the things that we want to happen, and it just makes things worse sometimes. So putting yourself in a positive place makes it less likely for you to be in a negative place. It's got to work harder. Your day, your life has to work harder to make you feel bad if you're in an amazing mood. Okay, everything from music to the amount of sleep that you get, to maybe you've managed to fit a workout in that day, to you read a really good book, or you had a really nice, amazing chat with someone, or you laughed, right? Sometimes we don't laugh enough, right? I laugh probably every week, right? Maybe even more often than that. I actually try to laugh as often as possible. I smile every day, at least every day. All right, several times a day, I make an effort to smile. Sometimes I don't need to make an effort. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it's self-created. I listen to a funny film or a funny song, and I just can't help it. But there are days when I've really got to force it. I've really got to make an effort. Okay, and the effort's worth it because it puts you in a positive place, and it means you're almost more bulletproof, if you will, for want of a better expression. I've not been able to quite come up with a different way of describing it, but you become more bulletproof to negativity when you're positive. Positivity is the armor that allows you to tackle the negativity and keep moving forwards. That's one of the biggest pieces of advice, is that if you're in a positive mood, you can attack as much as you want. You can attack anything. I've been in a position whereby I could have like 5 cancellations on like podcasts and interviews and you name it, right? You could be in that place whereby you've had cancellations, you've had, I don't know, maybe you name it, it could be anything, absolutely anything. Cancellations, people not showing up. You could have arranged to meet someone and they cancelled last minute. It could be in a traffic jam. You could have a wardrobe malfunction, like you've got some like very, very uncolour coordinated clothes on. Maybe you've had to wear clothes that are one size too small and everything's dead uncomfortable and it's just not in a good space. But if you woke up in an amazing mood, like just for some reason you're just in an amazing mood, you can handle all that in a much more effective and efficient way. Okay, so don't wait until you need to do it. Listen to that positive song. Have a song that you play every morning that puts you in a good mood. Listen to that one piece of music that will set you alight for the rest of the day. If it's learning that makes you go, so it could be an education thing, listen to an audiobook or a podcast or anything like that. There's all kinds of information out there that you can use, that you can benefit from. And if you can put yourself in a positive state every morning and then sustain that for the rest of the day, it's amazing what you can achieve. All right. So I had a conversation with someone the other day, and it was like, okay, how do you be like productive? How do you get stuff done? How do you set your week up so that you're not actually that stressed out every day? And one of the best pieces of advice that I gave was, I would rather have 3 hours of high energy and high positivity and high productivity. I'd rather have a very, very intense, happy and joyful 3 hours rather than trying to drag myself kicking and screaming through 8 or 9 hours. Time goes faster, you get more work done, everything's already pre-planned, and everything's all good to go because you're in a positive space. You get more done in less time. It's amazing how much time you can save when you work faster because you enjoy it, you're in a good mood, you've got bags of energy, you've maybe prepared for it beforehand, and everything seems to roll in. It's amazing how little negativity you feel. It's amazing how little fear you feel when you actually try and prevent it as much as you possibly can. Have a think about that. Don't wait until it shows up to do something about it. All right? We have this bit of a, I wouldn't say it was a pet peeve of mine, but it's something that tends to happen in certain places. It tends to be a health and safety thing, right? Like they wait for the accident to happen before they put the sign up to say, oh, don't do that. You know, like they put the don't jump in the river sign after someone jumps in the river. Or, you know, they wait until the bad thing happens before they then do something about it. But then you go to some other countries where it's already up and you go, have you had any accidents? And you go, no, because people read the sign before they try to do something, and we put it up ages ago, and we've actually prevented it from happening. So sometimes we let things get so bad before we then do something about it. And this is an invitation to not do that. This is an invitation to stop waiting for things to get so bad that you then have to do something about it. Don't wait for that. Start now. Put the things in place now that make you feel good. Do them every day. Do them every week. Do them every couple of hours if you need to, whatever it takes. I mean, I'm not saying that you've got to watch the same thing every hour because it gets boring, right? So there's an element of variety in there that you need as well. I wouldn't just have one thing. I would have several. Right? I have loads of things that I can do that can put me in a good mood, that can just take the edge off. It doesn't need to go from like very, very sad or fed up or frustrated to joyful, laughing all the time, but something that will just take the edge off a little bit from the negativity that you might be feeling. All right, it only takes a little thing, just enough to kick you in the right direction. That is all that you need to start this chain reaction of other things that you can do to make you feel better. And because you feel better, you do other things that make you feel better. And because you feel better, you do other things that make you feel better. And because you feel better, I think you get the message. But basically, negativity fuels negativity, positivity fuels positivity, and we all know which direction you want this to go. You want this to go towards the positive direction and not the negative direction. Okay? So what are the implications of this? Like, when we do this, what benefits do we get? What things do we think that we can actually achieve? And a big part of it is the feeling that we are actually happy. And what I mean by that is if you have a negative journey, like if you don't enjoy the journey on the way to where you want to go, if you're not actually enjoying yourself, then achievement doesn't last for very long. Achieving things, achieving goals don't last for very long before you then need to go and achieve more. And then once you've achieved that, it's not very long before you need to go and achieve more. And then once you've achieved that goal, it's not going to be long until you've got to set another one because you've already achieved that one and you need something else to do. By doing this, by having the little things that put you in a good mood, you enjoy the journey as well. So hopefully that is where I'm going to leave it. If you have any last, there is a little bit more that I could talk about, but I like to finish on a high note. I like to finish, and that sounded like an amazing way to finish. So, if you have any questions, now's your chance. I'm opening it up to a Q&A now, so if you want to, I can answer your questions about what I've said. Or something brand new. If you have a question regarding fear that probably I didn't cover, then feel free, because I can always add a little bit of extra value at the end just to make sure I cover something that you want me to cover. Just a couple more minutes, because I'm aware that people that'll be watching this might be like, I'm just kind of hanging around waiting for people to comment and things. And if you don't have any questions, then is this contentment? It's a big part of it. It's a very big idea that not many people are actually talking about. Like, we talk about like being happy and achieving goals and all those kinds of things, but just how long did you plan on going down that road until you've eventually got to be happy with it? Like, you've got to actually, eventually, you've got to be happy with where you're at. Otherwise, you'll be constantly trying to achieve something, constantly, and then when you finally made it, because you didn't enjoy the journey, you're still on the journey. So you're not going to enjoy after you've achieved it either. Because the achievement side, the celebration that you get from achieving something, might not last that long. And then you've then got to think, right, well, what do I do now? Do I just try and achieve more? Or do I actually then think about being content with everything, being happy with everything? Just settling for what I've got because it's enough, because I've achieved everything that I wanted to achieve, I've fulfilled everything that I wanted to fulfill, and it's more than enough. Alright, it's very, very strange, to say the least. Alright, very strange. But I do think that it's a difficult situation to put in when you don't do anything at all that puts you in a good mood, that you don't do anything at all that creates this positive frame around that you actually see your life and see your business. I mean, fear is the most intense emotion that we can feel, and it's amazing how many people feel it every single day. It's amazing how many people feel it every single day without realizing that all it takes is something very, very small that can tweak your way out of that. All right. So I think one of my big sort of rants a little bit earlier on was like, when we are in a good place, we start to think more rationally, we start to think more reasonably, we start to think more realistically, and it allows us to problem solve. Because when we're in a negative place and we're feeling the fear, we don't actually feel like we can get out of it when we are in it. We've got to get through and shift our emotional state first before we can then take the action. It's very, very rare that you will see someone act in a state of panic or act in a state of nerves. We've got to feel a little bit better before we then dive in. This is why people have breathing techniques and self-talk and little tweaks that they have that put them in a lower negative state, in a more positive state, so that they can then do that thing. Like, how many people have rituals before they go on stage, or sportsmen that have little rituals to help calm them down when they walk onto the pitch or the court or whatever the case is. It's a real thing, because it's nerves and it can overwhelm you so quickly. how do you draw the line in happiness, contentment, and fear? Well, happiness is it's more of a general thing. So are you happy? Yes, it's a general thing. Content tends to be like with what you have. Like you're content with what you have, with the situation that you are in. Contentment tends to tends to be very related to happy. Happiness is like the feeling, are you happy with the way that everything's going right now? Yes. Are you content with the way things are going now? Yes, they tend to go hand in hand. And fear is just the opposite of that. Like they used to say like you got like fear and love being like the two polar opposites. And the problem with that is love is a rarity. So when people, or at least when I used to read that, I used to go, well, love is so hard to attain that it's almost unrealistic. Right, we're almost at a point where achieving the exaggeration, achieving the high, intense, positive emotion is so rare to find. And they see fear and go, well, I feel fear every week. I feel fear all the time. So it then starts to cause this thing where life has a negativity bias, right? Like we have this fear thing that kicks in, and we have this, everything is revolved around feeling negative and wanting to move away from the negative without realizing that happiness is okay. Content is okay. Like you're allowed to feel those things and feel like that's a good day. You know, just because you don't feel like complete ecstasy doesn't mean that it's got to be negative then. So sometimes we need to have probably a more realistic conversation around it, because when I heard love or fear, I was like, well, what about in between? What about like, because love's so hard to find, but happiness is easy to find. Content is probably a little bit harder to find if we're always trying to move away from fear. Like if we're always in this negativity space, content's hard to find, but you can feel happier like quite quickly. And hopefully this training has helped with that. Hopefully this has given you a little bit to think about, hopefully a lot to think about. If you're watching the replay, you can obviously still comment, still answer the questions. I will pop back in and engage with you, and hopefully you've enjoyed this one. I know I have. I quite like the different format. I quite like it. I might start doing this a bit more often. Let me know if you have any feedback you want to give me on this one. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know what you think. And I'm sure I will speak to you again soon. So enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.